Welcome back to Mystic Narrative, where real-life games of Dungeons & Dragons become tales of heroes, villains, and those somewhere in between. Chapter 2, Insurrection. In this chapter, Enzo, Illaria, and Gorlami are confronted with a choice aboard a former passenger vessel, now under the control of the army of Lorenzo Conti, the man trying to unite the free cities of Vecchio under his rule. The choice is to be a soldier or a prisoner.
Do your soldiers get paid? Enzo asked in a nonchalant tone.
Of course we pay our soldiers. You would receive 50 gold pieces total. Half now, the other if you live, proclaimed the armored man.
Good. Then I'm on board. I'll take my gold now, Enzo said with a devilish smirk on his face. He took a small sack from the man and inspected the contents. 25 gold indeed. Well, then where would you have me go? Enzo asked the man.
You will board one of the smaller ships and row into battle with a few other volunteers. You will help us siege the city. Kill only enemy combatants, no civilians, the man explained.
With a smirk still painted on his face, Enzo replied, "What makes you think I would kill civilians?" as he walked away from the man, gold in hand. Both Gorlami and Illaria watched as Enzo interacted with the man. He was the only one who so boldly approached the soldiers. They were coming closer to cannon fire as thumps began to reverberate in their chests. Gorlami thought deeply about the situation he found himself in. That armor is quite intricate, Gorlami thought. In fact, it looked like work he'd seen in the past. It appeared to be quite like armor he had seen in the shops of Vecchio. Perhaps that armor was made in the city to the south, he said aloud, getting looks from people nearby. I must bide my time until I can make my move. I surely cannot fight for these people, so I must flee. What a pain! These men are very much in my way, thought Illaria. She looked around for signs of people trying to escape, but aside from the man who first spoke to the soldiers, and the handful of men talking to them now, no one was moving. Time was of the essence, as the cannon fire drew ever closer. She heard a man very near to her say something about a city to the south. City to the south? That sounds like just the place I need to be headed for. Obviously, Malermo is not going to be the tourist destination that I'd hoped.
All right, the time has come. Those who signed up for service report to the rowboats, the armored man exclaimed.
Enzo did as he was told. Now was certainly not the time for defiance. He was funneled towards a small rowboat, room for no more than 10 people. He boarded the boat without much complaint, and was shoved off with 7 other men. Only one of them was from Lorenzo's army. The rest were volunteers. As they rowed closer to the city walls, the smell of war lingered heavier in the air. The fog was nearly clear at this point, and Enzo could see the walls of the city in the distance. The cannon fire was so near and numerous, it was disorienting. Enzo was quickly realizing this was a near-suicide mission as cannonballs began to plunge violently into the waters near their boat.
"Keep rowing, men," the soldier said to them.
Back on the former passenger vessel, Gorlami was frantically studying his surroundings, looking for some clue as to how he could get off this accursed ship. He noticed that the men who had taken the ship were moving barrels around the deck. He hadn't noticed those before, but it didn't seem too out of the ordinary to him. Maybe they're organizing their supplies for the front line, he thought to himself. There simply must be a way out, he said aloud. Illaria, who sat on the deck quite near to him, leaned into him after hearing this and said quietly, "We just have to wait for an opening." At that moment, from directly behind them, they hear a man say,
"Oh, is that so? Well, I have your opening right here."
He grabbed Illaria and gestured for another to come and grab Gorlami. The two were whisked off, quickly off the deck. None of the onlookers dared say anything, for fear of being taken themselves. They were led into a room. It appeared to be the captain's quarters, judging by the decor.
"Sit in here and shut up. We'll be watching you fools," the men said to them as they walked out.
Just as their captors walked out of the room, 2 men clutching large blunderbusses walked in to guard the only exit of the room. Gorlami looked over at Illaria, a beautiful young girl with red, flowing hair and striking deep blue eyes. They almost look like sapphires. It appears that we are in this one together, so it's only polite that I introduce myself. I am Enzo Gorlami, inventor, Gorlami said confidently. I'm Illaria Salvatore. Now, stop talking. It was your talking that got us into this mess, she said quietly, frustrated. Listen here, Gorlami was interrupted by one of the guards. Shut up over there. I don't want to listen to you two prattle on. After that statement, the door opened. The man in ornate armor comes into the room flanked by 2 other soldiers, and before speaking a word, he pulled 2 flintlock pistols from his waist, one in each hand, and put the barrels to the heads of the guards. Before anyone could think to act, he squeezed the triggers. The guards violently dropped to the ground lifeless. At that moment, the ship rocked violently, and deafening explosion resonated through every inch of the cabin. One of the blunderbusses held by the guards slid across the floor toward Gorlami. Almost on instinct, he lunged for it and grasped it just in time. He didn't have time to properly shoulder the blunderbuss, but he knew these weapons. He pointed it in the direction of the murderous men and pulled the trigger. He was flung back under the force of the blast, but so were the men who came to kill them. They laid on the floor against the wall, their last breath leaving their lips. Illaria leapt to her feet and ran over to Gorlami, who was quite disoriented from his head bouncing off the back wall of the captain's quarters. Are you all right? She asked. As all right as a man can be after being nearly murdered, he said. You think they were going to kill us too? She asked. For certain. These men are clearly setting up for some form of mutiny here. Speaking of that, Gorlami remembered at that point the barrels, the explosion. Holy shit, we need to get off the ship and we need to do it now, he exclaimed, leaping to his feet. He grabbed Illaria by the arm to drag her with him. What do you mean? Aren't we safest inside from the gunfire? She asked, puzzled. The ship's going to blow any minute. Those barrels must be full of gunpowder. Gorlami spoke with distress, sharpening his voice. Illaria could see the distress in his eyes, so she decided to trust him in that moment. He hadn't given her a reason not to. As the 2 ran out onto the deck of the ship, it was clear. This was dire. The 2 looked around at the ships near them. Many were burning. Even the ship next to them was ablaze. Half of the upper deck was completely gone. Cannon fire was raining down all around them, and ship after ship was exploding. Illaria noticed at that moment a final rowboat that had been ready for the traders. There was no one left on the ship. They had slaughtered everyone. Let's get to that boat over there, Illaria said, and gestured to the last remaining boat. The 2 quickly ran to the side of the ship and jumped for the boat, which was already in the water. It was quite a drop, and it hurt to land on the small ship. Quickly, we have to get away from the boat as fast as we can, Gorlami said sternly. They rowed frantically, as fast as they could toward the shore. After a few strokes it happened. A shockwave tore across their small boat and pushed them towards the shore with a great force. Their ears rang instantly, and they could now hear nothing. Looking at the ship they were just on, there was nothing left of the entire upper deck, and the ship was ablaze. Still on the small ship with the other volunteers, Enzo was increasingly worried that he would not make it to land ever again. He would never be able to swim for shore from this distance. Besides, the soldier on his boat would surely kill him for deserting. He was beginning to accept his fate. The other men aboard the boat whispered to one another with similar doubt and worries. The soldier caught wind of the murmurs. Shut up and stay alert, men. This is no time for gossip. If you keep this up, I'll be forced to... His speech was cut short as he was struck by a cannonball. Enzo looked in horror as the upper half of the man was obliterated. The soldier's lower body collapsed into the water below. Enzo quickly recovered his wits and noticed that the other men were completely dumbfounded and horrified. Now was his chance. Okay, boys, it's time for us to get the hell out of here. Let's head for shore. We can surely escape this pointless battle if we make it to the shore, because if we keep this heading, we will surely meet the same fate as our commanding officer. Enzo spoke with an unfounded confidence. We can make it through this, but only if you listen to me. Enzo further tried to persuade the men. They were easily brought around to his way of thinking, as 2 more cannonballs landed within mere feet of their vessel. The boat turned toward the shore. As the boat began to turn, Enzo noticed something peculiar. There was a small boat in front of the fleet of vessels he was fleeing. He could barely make the boat out, but he saw a man in shiny golden armor, with a sword raised in a stance that screamed an order of charge. Next to him was another man, in simple clothes, who did not appear to be armed. Very odd. Could that be Lorenzo himself? How could he make it that far without being taken out? It was almost as if he was untouchable. There were no beaches nearby. The shore was mostly cliff's edge, with a few docks meant for larger ships, spread sporadically along the coastline. There was one such dock quite nearby. "All right, men, head for that wooden pier over there, but don't get us too close. We don't want to attract any unwanted attention," Enzo told the men. They managed to get close enough without being detected or hit by a stray cannonball. "Okay, let's swim for it," Enzo said to the men. They looked at him puzzled. "Well, what are you waiting for?" Enzo coaxed the men as he dove straight into the water. He swam straight for a lower platform just under the main pier. The other men followed him, and one by one they made their way onto the splintery wooden platform. They stood there for a moment and looked back to see the ships they had been escaping from begin to explode. It took a moment for the sound of the explosions to reach them. The sound arrived on a wave. It thumped into their chest. "Holy shit, what's happening over there?" one of the men wondered out loud. "It looks to me like the ships are exploding," Enzo said, half kidding. "Why would the ships be exploding like that?" one other man asked. "If I had to guess, it looks like an insurrection. But what would I know?" Enzo guessed. "Let's head for the city. Its walls are heavily fortified. It could take days for this siege to break them. If we can sneak into the city, we can sneak out the other side and be free from this menace," Enzo said to the men. They nodded in agreement with his plan. Enzo looked for a moment around and noticed that just at the end of the wharf there stood a guard post. From this vantage point, he could not see just how many men there were, but he assumed that there would only be a handful this far from the city. "There's a guard post at the end of the pier above. I'll go ahead and make sure it's empty. I'll give you a signal when it's safe for you to all climb the ladder to the top. Keep an eye on me from here. If I fail, you may need to find an alternate route," Enzo said as he began to work his way around the side of the pier, flicking himself from one wooden beam to the next. He was making this look too easy. He was able to climb to the top of the pier in an area where the guards could not have a good line of sight. He took his time and made sure to check his surroundings. The coast was clear. He popped up and quickly moved around silently to the rear of the post. It was there that he saw them. There were 3 men there, one standing watch in the post, while the other 2 were somewhat hidden, looking like they were ready to ambush anyone coming up the pier. Perhaps they saw our boat, Enzo thought to himself. None of them were looking in Enzo's direction. He had to figure out how to deal with all 3 of the guards at once. He stood little chance against them all. Looking around, he saw that there were some rifles sitting behind them in a small weapons cache. It was risky, but it was his best shot. He snuck up behind the men, grabbed 2 guns, and rigged their triggers with a small bit of rope he had with him. He leaned them at just the right angle toward the 2 hidden men, and he readied himself, facing the man inside the open-backed post. His heart was pounding, but this was it. He had to believe that it would work. There was no turning back from this. He pulled the rope and simultaneously leapt forward with his dagger drawn. He heard the guns go off. Both his ears were ringing from their muzzles being feet from his head. Just as the guard in the post turned to react, he was met with a blade to his neck. He'd done it. He'd made it. He signaled to his men to come up. It was safe for now. It was in that moment he found himself wondering, what became of my shipmates? It was a passing thought, but it troubled him nonetheless. So many innocent civilians, men, women, even children were aboard all those boats, and now they're burning and sinking to the bottom of the sea. What a horror this trip had become.
Thank you for watching and listening to Mystic Narrative. Each video will feature chapters novelizing a still ongoing game of Dungeons & Dragons. This is sure to be a narrative unlike any other. Be sure to subscribe to see how the tales of the land of Vecchio and its inhabitants unfold.